Welcome to the second part of judicial review under Indian Constitution for administrative law. This is Dr. K. Sangeeta. Now we will see the fear of judicial tyranny. A bench consisting of 3, 5 or 9 judges of the Supreme Court hears a judicial review case to prove the majority. It gives a decision by simple majority. Very often the fate of the law is determined by the majority of the single judge. In this way, a single judge's reasoning can determine the fate of the law which has been passed by majority of the elected representatives of the sovereign people. Reversal of its own decision by the Supreme Court, it is on the record that on several occasions the Supreme Court reversed its earlier decision. The judgment in the Kolaknath case reversed the earlier judgment, and the judgment in Keshwananda Bharati case, which was reversed, the judgment in Kolaknath case, the same enactment was held valid, then invalid, and then again valid. Such reversing reflect the element of subjectivity in the judgment. On all these grounds, the critics strongly criticize the system of judicial review as how it operates in India. Justification for judicial review. Judicial review is essential for maintaining the supremacy of the Constitution. It is essential for checking the possible misuse of power by the legislature and the executive. Judicial review is a device for protecting the rights of the people. No one can deny the importance of judiciary as an umpire or as an arbiter between the centre and the state for maintaining the federal balance. The grant of judicial review powers to the judiciary is also essential for strengthening the position of judiciary. It is also essential for securing the independence of judiciary. The power of judicial review has helped the Supreme Court of India in exercising its constitutional duties. The possibility of abuse of power by the judiciary is very less because several checks are there in existence. Lack of clear statement of power in any article of the Constitution, judicial review is not possible on some laws. The Parliament can place the laws aimed securing social economic reforms as in the 9th schedule of the Constitution. This makes these immune from judicial review. The scope of judicial review stand limited to only legal and constitutional cases. The Supreme Court, itself bound by the Constitution of India, and the Parliament can amend the Constitution under Article 368. The grant of specific fundamental right to all the limits to the scope of judicial review. The Parliament can pass laws and amend for overriding the hurdles created by judicial review. These limitations can prevent a possible misuse of judicial review power by the courts, a formidable fact which justifies the presence and continuance of judicial review has been judiciousness with which it has been used by Supreme Court and High Court for carrying out the constitutional obligation. These have used it with restraint and without creating hindrances in the way of essential social economic reform. In India, since Government of India Act 1858 and according to the Indian Council Act 1861, imposed some restriction on the powers of the Governor General in Council in evading laws, but there was no provision of judicial review then. The court had only power to implicate, but in 1877, in the case of Emperor versus Burra, for the first time it interpreted and originated the concept of judicial review in India. In this case, the court held that the aggrieved party had the right to challenge the constitutionality of an legislative act enacted by the Governor General Council, who has acted in excess of the power given to him by the Imperial Parliament. In this case, the High Court and the Privy Council adopted the view that Indian courts had power of judicial review with some limitations. Again, the Secretary of State versus Lord Haldane observed, the government of the India cannot by legislation take away the rights of the Indian subject conferred by the Parliament Act, the Government of India Act 1858, then in Annie Besant versus Government of Madras, which was the first case which interpreted and originated the concept of judicial review in India. In this case, the court held that the aggrieved party had the right to challenge the constitutionality of a legislative act enacted by the Governor General Council in excess of the power given to him by the Imperial Parliament. In this case, the High Court and the Privy Council adopted the view that Indian courts had the power of judicial review with some limitation. One should not forget that in Annie Besant versus Government of Madras, the Madras High Court observed on the basis of Privy Council's decision that there was a fundamental difference between legislative powers and the Imperial Parliament and the authority of the subordinate Indian legislature. Any enactment of the Indian legislature in excess of the delegated power or in violation of the limitation imposed by the Imperial Parliament will be considered null and void. Though there is no specific provision of judicial review in the Government of India Act 1935, the constitutional problems arising before the court necessitated the adoption of judicial review in a wider perspective, and now the Constitution of India in 1950 explicitly establishes the doctrine of judicial review under various articles. Article 13, 32, 131 to 136, 143, 226, 227, 245, 246 and 372. Important doctrines were formulated by the courts through judicial interpretation. First, we will see Article 13, which constitutes or incorporates judicial review of post-constituted constitution and pre-constitutional laws. This article inherited most important doctrines of judicial review like doctrine of severability, doctrine of eclipse. Article 13 provides for judicial review of all the legislation in India, past as well as the future. This problem has been conferred on the High Courts and Supreme Court of India under Article 226 and 32, which can be declared a law unconstitutional if it is inconsistent with any of the provisions of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Some other doctrines were also formulated by the court using the power of judicial review. The doctrine of pith and substance, the doctrine of colorable legislation. These doctrines are originated by the Supreme Court by using the power of judicial review to interpreting various articles. Doctrine of prospective overruling is a doctrine to interpret the judicial decisions. These doctrines are enumerated to interpret the constitutional provisions by Supreme Court. Judicial review in India is based on various dimensions like judicial review of the legislature, executive and the judicial act, which are explicitly provided in these doctrines. Now we will see doctrine of severability. Article 13 of the Indian Constitution incorporates this doctrine. Here the word "to extent of the contravention" or the basis of doctrine of severability. This doctrine enumerates that the court can separate the offending part unconstitutional of the impugned legislation from the rest of its legislation. The other parts of the legislation shall remain operative, and if that is possible. This doctrine has been considered as equity and prudence. It is the valid and invalid part are so inextricably mixed up that they cannot be separated, then the entire provision is considered to be void. This is known as doctrine of severability. In A.K. Gopalan vs. State of Madras, the case section where 14 of the Preventive Detention Act was found out to be violative of Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, it was held at the Supreme Court that in this section 14 of the Act, which is to be struck down, not the Act as a whole. It was also held that the omission of Section 14 of the Act will not change the objective of the Act, and hence it is severable. Supreme Court, by applying this doctrine of severability, invalidates the impugned law. Now we will see doctrine of eclipse. This doctrine applies in cases of pre-constitutional statute. Under Article 13(1) of the Constitution, all the pre-constitutional statute which are inconsistent to Part 3 of the Constitution becomes unenforceable and unconstitutional after the enactment of the Constitution. Thus, when such statutes were enacted, they were fully valid and operative. But subsequently, after the independence, when the 1950 constitutional law came into existence, they became eclipsed on the account of Article 13 and lost their validity. This is called doctrine of eclipse. If the constitutional ban is removed, the statute becomes free from eclipse and once again becomes enforceable. In Pikaji Narain was the state of Madhya Pradesh, an existing state law authorized by the state government to exclude all the private motor transport operators from the field of transport business. After this part of this law became void on the commencement of the Constitution, as it infringed the provision under Article 19(1)(g) and could not be justified under the provision of Article 19 subclause 6 of the Indian Constitution. First, the Amendment Act in 1951 amended Article 19 subclause 6, and due to this amendment, which permitted the government to monopolize any business, the Supreme Court held that after the amendment of 1906 clause, the constitutional impediment was removed and the impugned act ceased to be unconstitutional and became operative and enforceable. Now we will see doctrine of prospective overruling. The basic meaning of prospective overruling is to construe an earlier decision in the way so as to suit the present day needs, but in such a way which does not create a binding effect upon the parties to the original case or the parties bound by the precedent. The use of this doctrine overrules an earlier laid down precedent which effect limited to the future cases, and all the events that occurred before it are bound to be the old precedent in itself. In simple terms, it means that the court is laying down a new law for the future. This doctrine was propounded in India in the case of Kolaknath versus State of Punjab. In this case, the court overruled the decisions laid down in Sajan Singh and Sankari Prasad cases and propounded the doctrine of prospective overruling. The judges of the Supreme Court of India laid down its view on the doctrine in very substantive way by saying the doctrine of prospective overruling is a modern doctrine suitable for the fast-moving society. The Supreme Court applied the doctrine of prospective overruling and held that this decision will have only prospective operation and not an retrospective effect. The First, the Fourth and the 19th Amendment will continue to be valid. The question whether fundamental rights can be amended under Article 368 came for consideration of the Supreme Court in Sankari Prasad versus Union of India. The first case on amendability of the Constitution, the validity of the Constitution, the First Amendment Act 1951, curtailing the right to property guaranteed by Article 31 was challenged. The argument against the validity of the First Amendment was that Article 13 prohibits enactment of a law infringing and abrogating the fundamental rights, where the word law in Article 13 would include any law for that sake, then a law amending the Constitution, and therefore the validity of such law could be judged and scrutinized with the reference of the fundamental rights which it could not infringe. It was argued that the state in Article 12 included the Parliament and the word law in Article 13 too, therefore includes constitutional amendment. Again, 1964, Sajan Singh was the state of Rajasthan. The same question was raised when the validity of the Constitution, the 17th Amendment Act 1964, was called in question, and once again the court revised its earlier view that the constitutional amendment made under Article 368 are outside the purview of judicial review of the courts. In this case, the Constitution's 17th Amendment Act 1964 was challenged and upheld. After 2 years after the decision of Sajan Singh, in 1967, in Kolaknath was the state of Punjab, the same question regarding constitutional amendment was raised. In this case, The inclusion of Punjab Security of Land Tenure Act 1953, in which the 9th schedule was challenged on the ground that the 17th amendment by which it was included, as well as the 1st and the 4th amendment which abridges the fundamental rights, were considered to be unconstitutional. The Supreme Court overruled the decision of Sankari Prasad and Sajjan Singh's case. The Supreme Court observed that an amendment is a law within the meaning of Article 13(2), and it included every kind of law, statutory as well as constitutional law. Hence, the constitutional amendment which contravened Article 13(2) will be declared void. Courts further observed that the power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution is derived from Article 245, read with entry number 97 of the List 1 of the Indian Constitution, and not from Article 368. Article 368 only lays down the procedure for amendment of the Constitution. Amendment is a legislative process.